Grow out your hair, ghouls and gals, and put your axes away. Today we're becoming tree huggers, as we delve deep into the forests of Athelloren to discuss the only elves that still called the old world their home. They're not overly proud like their high of kin, nor are they absolute masochists like the Druki. Their society is somewhere in the middle, but at the same time it is also completely off the elven spectrum. Want to see what I mean? Well, come along and find out as we go over a brief history of the Wood Elves. Wood Elf history is a bit of a strange beast to tackle. Time is weird in the Great Forest of Athelloren. A day can feel as if it passes in a blink, or it takes an eternity. It's a bit like the COVID times, really. Time changes depending on what region you're in, too. Even with all this, the Elves of Athelloren have managed to keep a pretty solid history of their people. Rarely do they write things down, and instead they prefer to remember the stories of their people through songs and ritual performances from the war dancers. Unlike the Empire or Bretonnia, they also don't really have a strict calendar either. Instead, they experience history through great seasons, which can take up centuries at a time. There's no definitive ruling on how long a season lasts, or when it ends. It's really more of a vibe thing, which means that I'm not really going to be giving you many dates here, and instead I'll just highlight the seasons when they pop up. In any case, we can throw out all our knowledge about the Wood Elves for now, because even though this video is about them, Athelloren's history began long before they showed up in the forest. This period is known as the Forgotten Season to the Elves, and it encompasses thousands of years when the only inhabitants of Athelloren were the forest spirits. No records of this period remain, and the Elves aren't even sure whether it was a golden age before they came along and sullied the land, or if it was a dark time, and only with the Elves' arrival did Athelloren know true magnificence. The Elves arrived in Athelloren following the War of the Beard. If you want to know more on that, check out the Dwarves video I did a while back. In short, it was a war between the Elves and Dwarves that the pretty boys lost, and so the High King decided it wasn't worth maintaining an elven presence in the old world anymore, and called all the elven colonists home. While most of the Elves did decide to leave, some liked their new home and stayed there. Knowing the Dwarves would come for them again, they took refuge in the forest of Athelloren, and for a time they were safe. They were led by Orion, a fierce hunter and lord, and Ariel, a mage who taught the elves to treat the forest with love, awe, and reverence. These elves might have familiar names, but at the time they were just former colonists who sought to lead this new branch of their people. Before long, the dwarves came back to finish the job and purge the Wood Elves from the old world. The elves held a great council at the Oak of Ages, where it is said even the trees leaned in to listen. There, Orion and Ariel met for the first time, and while everyone else was trying to stop a genocide, these two lovebirds were making puppy eyes at each other from across the hall. Eventually, the tension grew to such a point they just stepped out to find a secluded bush, if you catch my drift. While Orion was busy tending to his spear, a new face showed himself to the council. Adan who, wisest and oldest of the treemen, finally revealed himself to the Wood Elves. He'd been watching them for a while, and it was he who had allowed them into Athelloren in the first place, but only decided to appear in their most desperate hour. He would lend them the aid of the forest spirits, so they might match the dwarves in number. And that they did. The elves and the forest spirits, including massive treemen, sent the dwarves packing, but just as one foe was dealt with, another popped up. Greenskins, as always, were ready to ruin everything, and in the winter of woe, they sought to destroy Athelloren to make massive fires to keep themselves warm. The forest spirits were weakened by the weather, and the elves were pushed back to a grand final stand at the Oak of Ages. There they heard a mighty horn blast through the air as Kurnos, god of the hunt, had joined them along with a pack of shadowy hounds. The elves that saw him were given renewed vigour, and as Kurnos smashed into the line of greenskins, the Wood Elves again knew they were saved. After the battle, they returned to find Ariel and Orion sitting on thrones. They had changed from their elven forms to become avatars of the mother goddess Isha and the hunter Kurnos. At the sight of this pair, another council was called, and they were crowned the king and queen of the woods. This period was known as the Season of Rebirth, by the way, and from it we move straight onto the Season of Withering. While the Elves of Athelloren were busy licking their wounds following two lots of armies trying to hack and burn their woods, in the lands around the Great Forest men were starting to settle. The Bretonnia tribes had seen the elven ruins nearby and thought they'd make for some great castles, and so they started to build settlements of their own, even pushing into the woods to try and expand their new territory. The Elves were having none of it though, and slew any barbarians that dared enter their home. In time, a few survivors did escape, but they ensured that no Breton would try and colonise the woods again. In Bretonnia lore, they are said to be filled with madness and wild things. Around this time, one of the Wood Elves' greatest foes appeared, a beastman known as Morga. Beastmen had roamed Athaloran since the elves first appeared, and long before that. They made it their home, and also wished to destroy it. Bit of a strange thing to do to your house, but these are the forces of chaos we're talking about. The Beastmen were no great threat until Morga came around. First discovered by Ariel, he was also known as Cianthaner, and was a being of corruption. He and his twisted followers brought darkness to the woods, and even 2 centuries after Ariel first noticed him and believed she had destroyed him, he returned, with thousands of beastmen and other creatures at his back. He could be felled by no blade, and each part of the woods he touched was forever tainted. As is the case with most great enemies that come to Athaloran, Morga pushed forward until he was stopped at a final, desperate battle. There, Coadil, one of the most powerful treemen around, grasped Morga in his giant fist, while Ariel blasted him to pieces with magic. There was seemingly no coming back from this assault, but even when he was gone, everything that was touched by Morga, or even his blood, was forever tainted. I wonder if that's going to have any lasting impact. Oh look, here's the great betrayal. Remember Coadil? You should, as I only spoke about him a minute ago. Well, it seems he drank a bit too much of the Morga Kool-Aid, as 500 years after he beat up Morga, he went into an elf-hating rampage, bursting through the woods with his like-minded spirit chums, and went to kill the wild riders so that Orion could not be reborn. At this time, Ariel woke from a great slumber and helped the riders fight off the treeman. For his crimes, Coadil was imprisoned in the Wildwood, the shadowy part of southwest Athaloran, where no elf ever walked. There he was left to sit and think about what he'd done, with waystones preventing him from being able to return. His handmaidens went a bit mad in exile as well, stalking the glades with wicked intent. We now move on to the Season of Revelation, a bit of a golden age for Athaloran after all that corruption. Elves and the forest grew ever closer, and they mostly stayed within the boundaries they called home. It's not a bloodless era, not at all. Morga comes back, because of course he does, and sets his sights on a mountain known as Silverspire, one that supplied Athaloran with clean waters. Ariel didn't want to weaken herself facing Morga again, but Orion was more than willing to give him a good hiding. After killing Morga once more, Orion knew he would not die for good, and when he resurrected again, the Wood Elves rode to meet him. This time they were joined by the Bretonii, led by one Giles Le Breton. From that battle, the Bretonii sought to make allies with the Elves. Such a long-standing friendship wouldn't hold, but they both agreed to shield the realm from Morga. Unfortunately, because of this, more people heard about the fair folk of the woods, and new threats came knocking at Athaloran's doorstep. News also came the way of the Wood Elves. Specifically, they heard of the ongoing war between the High and Dark Elves. Ariel's sister Alisara felt guilty for the conflict. She had been Malekith's wife, after all, and wished to return to him, to see if she could calm his rage. After much persistence, Ariel relented, allowing her sister to travel. Morathi knew of this, and yet she also knew she could not act to stop Alisara's arrival herself. Instead, she charmed Valador, a high elven noble of Illyrian, and made him believe the escort coming from Bretonia's shores was one of Dark Elf corsairs. Valador rocked up and attacked the Wood Elves, only realising what he'd done when he drove his spear through Alisara's heart. It's safe to say Ariel wasn't best pleased about her sister's murder, and in the Season of Retribution she immediately set out to find out who did it. Using the world routes, Orion jetted off to Illyrian, where he instantly demolished the High Elves before riding onto Naggaroth. There he fought his way to the fortress of Grond, Morathi's home, and with Ariel he burst through line after line of defence until the King and Queen of the Woods had the Hag at their mercy. Morathi pleaded for her life, and Orion was about to end it when Ariel stopped him. The Hag offered Ariel knowledge of dark sorceries, and thinking she could repair this taint in the world roots and Athaloran, Ariel accepted the deal. This led to a lot of bickering between the forest's happy couple, and Ariel began travelling down a dark road. As she embraced the darkness, so did the elves around her. Even the spirits went a little kooky. If anyone trespassed into Athaloran, if a member of a dwarven clan that had once wronged the elves was trading nearby, if a human set up his tent a bit too close to the woods, they were instantly and mercilessly dealt with. Ariel sent thousands of elves to purge nearby lands of any and all threats, never wanting the woods to come under threat again, but during this time she began to lose herself. It was clear even if the forest was safe for now, she was losing herself to these dark magics, and when the High Elves sent emissaries to make amends for the death of Alisara, Ariel had them trapped in the forest before spewing them out at some unsuspecting Bretonian peasantry who killed the High Elves thinking they were evil spirits. It was also clear that Ariel's emo phase wasn't exactly good for the health of the forest. If anything, it was like a form of Morga's corruption, and it led the Wood Elf population to start dwindling. Seeing the plight of the forest and the Wood Elves, old Danhu, leader of the spirits, tried to reason with Ariel to bring her back from the brink, but Ariel set her maddened elves on the treemen. In a last desperate act, he took her corruption and sealed it within himself, ending his life in the process but saving Ariel. After that moment, Ariel saw what she had done to the woods, to her people, and sealed herself within the Oak of Ages, bringing back Orion to lead her people until she was ready to return. Orion's return heralded the season of redemption, as the Wood Elves tried to tend old wounds they had made with the Bretonnians and Dwarves. They aided both factions in battle, especially helping Bretonnia fight off the endless tides of Skaven. To the Bretonnians, the Wood Elves were considered friends once more, but the Dwarves kept their grudges from the season of Retribution. As Orion fought to improve the Wood Elves' PR, Ariel was just sitting in her little self-pity bunker. Outside of the King and Queen of the Woods, this era also sees the introduction of Daith, as he creates the Spirit Sword for Findol. Findol tries to refuse payment, but like a loan shark, Daith brings the baddest woodland spirits to come knocking down Findol's door, ensuring that everyone paid their bills from then on. Morga comes back and is killed by 100 arrow shots this time around, so there's not much else to say there. It just seems he keeps getting up and keeps getting knocked back down. As Ariel watches Wood Elf society, she sees it healing but knows that for it to be truly whole, she must act in unison with Orion. Sadly, she's not quite ready for that, and instead sends her emissaries, Naestra and Arahan. Naestra has dark hair, loves healing, and wouldn't hurt a fly, while white-haired Arahan loves battle, threatening people, and margaritas. At first, these two weren't trusted by the elves, but were allowed to attend council meetings. Ariel does then return in the Season of Doom, which begins when Naeth, the prophetess, sees the death of Athalloran in a dream. There's a lot to cover in this section, as it takes us up until the present day in Warhammer lore, so strap in, kiddos! First off, as you probably guessed, Morga's back, and this time, even as the Wood Elves think they've got him pinned, he leads them into a trap. Using himself as bait, Morga draws the Wood Elves in, leaving them unaware of another Beastman horde at their backs. For the first time in centuries, he escapes their clutches, free to corrupt the woods around him. During this time, again, we see a lot of Wood Elves showing up to help other factions. They support the Dwarves of Karak Kadrin when Ungrim Ironfist fought a host of Greenskins, only to have the Dwarves then turn on them to settle old grudges. They help Bretonnia again and again, and Naestra and Arahan show up to stop a horde of demons from ravaging the Empire. There's even a time where a bunch of Dryads intervene to save Morathi's life. It's never explained who exactly is behind that, but it is interesting. The High Elves and Dark Elves try to win over their tree-hugging kin during this time as well, with ambassadors being sent by both factions to win them over. Ariel and the Wood Elves kept the Dark and High Elf emissaries away from one another, like that one episode of every sitcom where a guy has two dates. But in the end, the Wood Elves accepted neither offer. The High Elves still saw them as a lost colony, and the Dark Elves made promises that even they couldn't fulfill. The Season of Doom is also a time of rage, with Durthu going sicko mode after Greenskin started hacking and burning at the forest, and Orion randomly going insane one season. He grew his wild hunt to 4 times its original size, and battered the Bretonnian province of Cornell until there was pretty much nothing left. Only when he entered its glade did he finally calm down, throwing himself on the pyres to be reborn much earlier than expected. Our final note contains Striker, who throughout most of Wood Elf history has been trying to free her master Codil from captivity. After leading her spirits in a seemingly endless campaign collecting artifacts, Striker finally manages to shatter the wards Ariel had placed around the Wildwoods, keeping Codil in. Wild hunters hear of this, but by the time they arrive on the scene, Codil is free. In the end times, Athalloran is actually the last bastion of hope for the forces of order, as it manages to hold out against chaos due to its natural protections, but I'm not going to delve deeply into that event here. I think we've reached the limit of what I can define as a brief history, but do let me know if you want an end time specific video on the Wood Elves, or just more stuff about them. I do love the Wood Elves, as their limited numbers and connection to the natural world always feels more interesting than the masochist Dark Elves or the goody two-shoes High Elves. But that'll about do it this time, and as always, leave a like, comment, whatever you want, and I'll be seeing you again soon.